everyone, Doa from Ice Cave Radio here, back with another deck in my infrequent, but hopefully getting more frequent over time, deck tech series. But this is one I'm extra excited about because it's a deck that was sort of brewed by a Discord member named Dummy in set 1. I kind of tweaked it a little bit for set 2. And honestly, it is the deck in Star Wars Unlimited that I feel comes closest to what I kind of saw as being a little bit too strong, a little bit too broken. I think he piloted it to something like 12-0 across a couple different store showdowns. With this list in front of you right now, just days ago, I took it to second place in a store showdown here in the Los Angeles area. I'm going to take it again to another one at my local store tomorrow night, and we'll see how it does there. But yeah, I mean, it's a list nobody has been talking about at all in set 2, and I was thinking about the other day because I was struggling with, what to come up with to play for store showdowns around the area, and I'm like, why don't I just go back to Casino Han? I mean, it's incredibly strong, and it doesn't really need a lot to catch up to the set 2 meta, just small tweaks. As you can see, not a lot of set 2 stuff in here, but I will say this is an extremely consistent list. It will do what you want it to do 99 games out of 100. It is not a random inconsistent list like people try to paint Casino Han out to be. This is a very polished version of that concept. And notably, it's not the green tempo set 1 Han that we see popping up still in tournaments here and there. This is a pretty different list from that. I will say that this is a difficult list to play. It definitely requires a lot of reps. But once you put the time in, if you really enjoy playing it, you're going to find a ton of success with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through the list card by card, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how you pilot it, how you play the list, and then you can just take it out there and have some fun with it. I'm not sure how this is going to be in set 3. Also, I have another list at the end of the video, which are the little tweaks I'm doing to this to go into my next store showdown tomorrow. But this is a list that I took to a store showdown a few days ago and took second place in. So it is a strong list. It performed well there. So we're going to start with that. And then I'll talk about some of the ideas I had for changing things a little bit later in the video. There we go. So R2-D2 is the first unit we'll talk about. R2-D2 and C-3PO are both 3 ofs in this list. Card draw is very important anytime you're playing a set 1 Han deck because by nature of his ability costing you a card from hand to do, you want to find ways to generate more card draw. And C-3PO and R2-D2 are a great way to do that. I would say aside from drawing a resupply in your opening hand, drawing R2 and C-3PO are the next best thing. And it can also be one of them individually. R2 obviously lets you look at the top card and put it on the bottom if you want to, leave it on top. R2 is good. He sticks around. He's got 4 health. Not much more to say there. Everybody knows what R2-D2 does. 2 of for Spark of Rebellion. This is just a great card, of course, in the control matchup, but it's also really crucial, too, if you're getting into that turn, resource turn 3, resource turn 4, you're playing against aggro and you want to rip like a Wrecker or a K2SO out of the Sabine player's hand too. Knowing when to play this and what to look for is a pretty core component of what this deck does. You can see there's another one in the sideboard. Sometimes we do want to go up to 3. I think in the control matchups, you always want to have 3 in there. You want to be able to grab the Avengers, the takedowns, the removal / big units that are going to cause you the most trouble in the moment. But again, like this deck is just filled with cards that they're okay on their own, but if used in just the right way, can be devastating for your opponent. I beat Iden Blue at the store showdown just purely, I would say, through Spark of Rebellion usage. Just happened to hit the right things at the right time, knew what to choose, and it really crippled them. So yeah, moving on. C-3PO. This card is actually huge. This card is great in this game, and don't be afraid to take it and play it turn number 1. Notably, if you look across this deck, the majority of the deck, or at least half of it, a lot of the cards are 3-drops. So if you don't have R2-D2 to tell you, what the next card coming up is, it's very safe to say 3, and a lot of times you'll flip it and look like a genius to your opponent. And, of course, we know we have lots of 3s in this deck. But yeah, C-3PO can be consistent card draw in this deck, even if you don't have R2-D2 out, which is a unique aspect of the deck that you get to use 3PO in that way. Aside from that, another chunky body, 1/4, sticks around, annoying for your opponent to get rid of. So, yeah, great play there. Then we have Admiral Akbar. I would say Admiral Akbar is probably best used in this deck out of any deck I've ever seen in Star Wars Unlimited. No joke. I've gotten more 3 pings, 4 pings to my opponent's units with Admiral Akbar than like using him in any other deck I've ever played him in. You look at what comes up before him a lot of times: R2D2, C3PO, Ezra Bridger, Millennium Falcon, Tech. There's a lot of cards that are a little bit difficult for your opponent to remove. And so if you can get to a situation where, say, you have an Echo-based Defender out, they have Sabine flipped, and you have an action before, she attacks in or something, you play Admiral Akbar, ping Sabine for 1, and then it's like, oh, well, now if I swing into the Defender, I just lose my leader. So there's a lot of, like, really interesting little unique things you can do to make this deck work out. I had a game the other day against a Ray Red at my local when I was doing some testing with this, and I actually ended up winning the game because I had my Han Solo unit out, and they had a Village Protectors that I needed to get through in order to swing in for lethal. And I ended up doing a U-Wing reinforcements, going R2 just to get a 1-drop out, and then Akbar. So the first Akbar came in, pinged the Village Protectors to remove the shield. The second Akbar came in, obviously defeated the first one, but then was able to do the damage to take out the Village Protectors completely to pave the way for my Han Solo to go through. So Akbar is like such a crazy versatile card in this deck. You can do a ton with him, and he's got Restore on top of all that. He's a 1/4, again, another hard unit to remove for your opponent. It can just be really annoying, So great card. Love using it in this deck. He's an all-star for sure. Echo-based Defender, just 4/3 taunt. Sentinel rather, does a lot of damage to whatever it's attacking into. It's just a great thing to throw in front of your opponent. It's a great speed bump, basically. That's about it. And being able to play it with U-Wing reinforcements at a crucial moment is good too. And you can always use Han ability to play on the very first turn of the game. That's annoying for your opponent to get through. So yeah, just a nice 3-drop to throw into the deck. Resupply. So Resupply obviously gives you that extra resource. It is the best turn 1 play you can do. You start the game, you go Han Solo ability, and then you resupply. You start the next turn with 4 resources already. The idea with this deck is to get to the point where you can go 5 resources, Han ability into 6 resources, flip Han, attack with Han, go to 7 resources, and then play one of your 7 drops. And you can do that on the 3rd turn of the game very consistently with this. If you don't get resupply in your opening hand and can't play it in like turn 1, turn 2, then you're going to be using all those 3 drops to sort of stabilize and buy time until you can get to your 7 drops, because you'll be just like hitting 7 drop, 7 drop, 7 drop basically for the rest of the game after that big flip turn starts. So if you can get resupply in your opening hand, I would say you want a hard mulligan for resupply more than anything. Like if you don't get a resupply in your opening hand, doesn't matter what any of the other cards are, just mulligan. Mulligan for resupply. The nice thing with this deck is that it's very unlikely that you won't have any turn 1 play, again, because of all the 3 drops and because you're Han Solo. You can play a 3-drop on the first turn. So pretty much just hard mulligan for resupply. I guess we're going over some of the piloting aspects of this, but we'll revisit it. We'll go back and do a summary at the end too, but I'll include some of that data in the card-by-card breakdown. Moving on to Ezra Bridger. This card is incredible. You play this turn number 1. Ezra is, I would say, your 3 best turn 1 plays. So your 2 resource turn plays are going to be Han ability, of course, and then either R2D2 and C3PO on the same turn. That's huge. Resupply is the number 1. And then 3rd place between those two, if it goes resupply, the droids, 3rd would be Ezra, for the sole purpose that the next turn he can attack and then potentially find a resupply, which you can then play right away. So it's a great card to do that, just to give you a little bit more ramp. If you can, use his attack to then play something off the top of your deck, even if it's something like an Akbar, 3PO, or an Echo-based Defender, well, that's a card you didn't need to use from your hand. And remember, you want to save cards in your hand to power those 7-drop turns later when you might need to drop, another one from your hand to power the Han Solo ability, especially if they take out your Han Solo leader a little bit earlier than you want. He's also a 3/4 body. He's very difficult for your opponent to remove. He usually trades 2 for 1 in a lot of aggro matchups. You think about all those 3/2s that are out there in the aggro matchup. He takes out one of those and lives to do something else. So yeah, just a really annoying unit for your opponent to get rid of, and has that side benefit of potentially getting you an extra card in hand by virtue of playing the one off the top of your deck. And man, if he hits resupply, this deck does a lot of mental damage, I'll say. Like, Just plunking a 3PO without the R2, naming 3 and getting off the top, your opponent's going to be like, because they don't know you have so many 3-drops. Same thing with Ezra Bridger. Whenever you attack with him, you find a resupply and you're like, I'll play the resupply. They'll be like, oh. And so that's what I'm talking about. This deck does little, we'll say mental chip damage as well, which is a ton of fun. Moving on to the Millennium Falcon. This card is incredible. I mean, I need to stop saying that about every card, but like every card in this deck feels incredible. This one feels the best in matchups like Sabine, and I will say that I have no problems playing into Sabine at all with this deck. Even against, I've played some really great Sabine players. They can always run you over. I mean, that just happens, right? Sabine just has these games where they just run anybody over. But in your average Sabine game, I feel very comfortable into it. And one of the biggest reasons is a Millennium Falcon. And that is because a very common first turn play for a Sabine, whether it's Cunning or it's ECL, is to play the A-Wing, right? The Green Squadron A-Wing. Then you say, all right, Han Solo ability, 3 resources. I play Millennium Falcon. I kill the A-Wing. And then, because Han Solo's ability works very well with the Millennium Falcon, next turn, you have to look at the ordering very carefully here, right? So when you ready cards during the regroup phase, either pay 1 or return this unit to their owner's hand. Now, if you look at the Han Solo leader, he says at the start of your next action phase, defeat a resource. So that means you can indeed pay the resource to keep the Millennium Falcon out and then destroy that resource because of what Han's ability makes you do. The ordering works out that way. That's intended by Fantasy Flight. And yeah, just nice little hidden synergy between Han and the Falcon. Very, very cool. But either way, yeah, great turn 1 play against a lot of Sabine players, anyone that plays stuff in the air. So the Millennium Falcon is also great late game, of course, because you can just play it for some surprise damage. You can also, if it's a slower game, just throw it up there in the space arena and just start chipping away at them with 3 damage, and it's another annoying unit for them to get rid of. Fleet Lieutenant. Not a whole lot to say about this one. Just a great card. You buff a rebel unit. Notably, you can't buff Millennium Falcon with it. You can't buff Han Solo, the leader unit, or the unit with it. So it does feel a little bit more restricted in this list than in something like Sabine, where you're just like throwing it on anything, right? So you have to keep that in mind. You don't want to get caught where you play a lieutenant thinking you can buff something, and then your opponent's like, actually, it's not a rebel unit, and you're like, oh, I forgot that. But that said, I think it's also just straight up, if you need to, a decent turn 1 body, right? It just first turn of the game, if you need a 3/3 out there, you just plunk it down and there it is, right? So it's got its usefulness. There are still a lot of rebels. Obviously, it's good to pair with one of the droids to be able to clear something and keep the droid alive. But you do have to be a little bit careful with how you play it in this deck compared to some of the other ones that run it. Moving on to Spare the Target. This just used to be Waylay, obviously, but we got a better version of Waylay in set 2 for Heroism. It's the same thing. Return an enemy non-leader unit to its owner's hand. It is enemy specific, whereas Waylay is just any unit, I believe. But you also get to collect bounties. That rarely comes into play. I have gotten that to happen where I send a unit back to hand and get to claim the bounty with it. That always feels good, especially if it's card draw. But more than anything, it's just, Heroism Waylay with an upside, and that's why we're running that instead of Waylay, because we're not going to really bounce our own units outside of maybe with Bright Hope. Moving on. Tech, another set 2 card that made it into this list. I only ran 1 at the store showdown from the other day that I did very well at. I bumped it up to 2 in the next list, spoiler alert. But Tech is... the thing is, I will still say I feel like Tech is on the bubble with this list of a card that I just might not want to include. And I'm not sure yet if it's because I am not as good at using Tech as I should be, or Tech just isn't as good in this list as it is in like the double Cunning Han. A lot of people will see this like, well, why don't you play DJ? And it's like, this deck isn't really trying to do that type of shenanigan. We're not really trying to mess with their resources or maybe get lucky and play something from their resources like Tech DJ lets you do. This deck is trying to get to 7 as fast as possible. It's just trying to ramp essentially harder than any other deck in the game can. And so Tech is basically just there as insurance. if your whole board gets wiped, if you get to the super late game against some of the slower matchups, you can play a tech and then play some of the 7 drops, a home 1 maybe that you put in your resources earlier. And yeah, you need like 9 resources, 10 resources to do it. But, you know, in a late game situation, he has come in handy from time to time. It's very easy for your opponent to clear the tech late game, of course, and that's what makes me kind of think maybe I don't want to include it after all, but he's in there for now. I've had some good experiences with it. I've had a lot of games where it just doesn't seem like he does much in this list, but I haven't made a final judgment on tech yet. So for now, he's in there, and I even bumped it up to 2 of. So I think he still has some usefulness. We'll see. We'll see if he lasts. Bright Hope. Just a great sentinel in the air, and then rarely you will want to return a unit to your hand for the card draw. Because remember, it's you return a friendly unit to your hand and you draw a card. So you end up net positive 2 cards in your hand for that, which again, if you need that for your Han Solo ability on a given turn, can be useful. I don't end up using the bounce very much. Usually I end up just throwing it in front of my opponent's air stuff to just delay. But that option is there, and that's kind of nice to have. Also a great target for U-wing reinforcements, right? Moving on to the Auzatuk Liberator Gunship. Now, this is another card that's on the bubble a little bit, but I will say, second turn of the game, when you have access to 4 resources as Han, it's just a great thing to surprise people with, just to one-shot a lot of the early aggro air units, right? Whether it's a Red 3, you know, A-Wing, something like that. It's nice to just take out some of those and then live, you know? So it's in there for now for more anti-aggro air insurance. Again, another unit you can just throw out there too if the air is you know, vacant and you want to just kind of be annoying and ping them for 3 damage each turn. So it's a card that I feel like won't last too many more iterations with this deck, but for now I think it's still good, and I think it's still something you want to include. Traitorous. Ah, yes. One of my favorite cards in the entire game. I absolutely love this card. It is so good in this list. It's unbelievable. This card literally kills Sabine. When you play a Traitorous on the second turn of the game, because remember, in theory, you know, you've gotten lucky with a resupply. You go into the second turn with 4 resources. You Han ability to go up to 5, and then you use Traitorous to steal something very important from them, like a Sabine or something like that. They are going to weep aggro tears, and you're just going to be like, I'll borrow that for a while. that was kind of a creepy laugh, but you know, I mean, you should feel a little bit creepy playing Traitors, but you should also feel good. It's a great card, anti-aggro. You know, some of the other stuff like playing against Kira or Iden, where they're playing some of, you know, like the Client or something like that, you can steal that. So this card has more versatility than you might think, but in some of the control matchups, don't be afraid to like sideboard one of them out. You might only need 2 of them, but against aggro, having 3 of these is just crazy. I played against a Kylo, and like he didn't get to keep anything on the board, because it was like my early drops were just bigger, and so I just trade and keep stuff out, and then he finally played something else and I just stole it. So it's you know, it feels like a mean card, but that's what this deck does. It does mean things. Let's move on. U-wing reinforcements. Now we're getting into our 7 drops. Now we're getting into the meat of the Han Solo, of the Casino Han list. I've renamed this list The House Always Wins, because I feel like that's the kind of casino we're operating in now. We're rigging the machines to always let us come out on top. U-wing reinforcements is a great card, obviously. We've known that for a long time, but this is one of the decks that just gets to play it all the time, every game. 2 in a row sometimes, super early. And again, keep in mind that you are playing the 7 drop on the 3rd turn of the game, because in an ideal world, you've gone resupply turn 1, and then you get to the 3rd turn of the game, you have 5 resources out naturally. You're going to use your Han Solo leader to go to 6 resources. You're then going to flip Han Solo and attack with him, go to 7 resources, and then it doesn't matter if Han survives or not. You just play a 7 drop. The best thing about U-wing reinforcements is its ability to search for the 7 drop you really need in the moment. Sometimes you want to go wide, like in the control matchups. I think a lot of cases when you're playing against blue that targets a lot of does a lot of single target removal, then it's good to go wide sometimes and just sort of try to overwhelm your opponent with that. But there are a lot of games where you're like, all right, well, if I search for my Han Solo unit, then I can swing in and attack something right away with the ambush, and then I have a 6/6 on the board that they can't deal with because I have a 4/6 leader and a 6/6 unit, and they have nothing, you know? Or a Mace Windu. I can go in, kill something a little bit smaller, and then ready, and then put more pressure on their base. In the control matchup, honestly, even the 97th Legion is a great choice, because then every turn, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I've killed Crate Dragons with 97th Legion, because it gets up to a 10/10. And then they're just like, I'll play my Crate Dragon. Or like, all right, I'll trade into it. That's removal, right? So it's something. So that's a nice thing with U-Wing reinforcements, is that you can play wide, right? You can grab a lot of the smaller units, or you can just grab one of the big units and just be choosy about which one you're grabbing at the time. Maul is a new addition to that too. I guess we can just kind of go through all the 7 drops at once, really, with this, where we've got 97th Legion. This unit gets +1/+1 for each resource you control. They get very big, very fast in this deck. That is nice. You can always just resource them early too. Mace Windu, off aspect, of course, but U-Wing lets you play him for 7. And he's only 9 too, and there's a lot of games where you'll go up to 9 resources. So if you need to hard play him from hand, you can. He's also 9 with tech if he's in your resources too, because tech just looks at the base cost. Moving on to Han Solo. This is kind of the one you're really looking for with U-Wing, or, you know, if you just have one in your hand, you just want to play it instead of U-Wing. The ambush is great because he can kill something big. He can even take out, like, I've had Han Solo come in and kill the Rey leader, not take any damage back, and then, like I said, you've got your 4/6 leader out, you've got your 6/6 Han Solo that can attack into basically anything and live, not take damage, and her opponent's just like, and then even if they have a single target removal, you still have one of the other ones left, right? And you've still got more 7 drops coming. So it gets overwhelming very quickly. The newest 7 drop that I've included in this deck is just a 1 of Maul. This used to be a 1 of Count Dooku. Remember, the aspects don't really matter because if you use U-Wing reinforcements, you can just play it, right? Maul works a little bit better because, again, if you need to hard cast it from hand, you only need to pay for the villainy aspect tax. You are in command already. And sometimes this card is good. I nearly always prefer Han Solo or Mace Windu, but sometimes you're like, all right, well, if I grab the Maul now and I just ambush and do a ton of damage with Overwhelm, that just puts me in a great spot to, you know, end the game. And you've got this nice little side synergy too, where like the Millennium Falcon is Underworld, Han Solo leader is Underworld, so you actually do have a couple targets that Maul can shunt the damage onto. So weirdly, it does work well in this deck, and I'm only running 1 for now because I'm kind of trialing it, but I could see maybe going up to 2 eventually. And then finally, in the end, we've got 2 Home 1. Home 1 is just a great, you know, finisher. You know, obviously it's a big body in space. It's got Restore 2. It gives everything else you have Restore, and it lets you play a 3-drop. And again, you've got so many versatile 3-drops that you've been playing and then having die over the course of the game that you'll have access to like an Echo-based Defender if you need taunt, a Millennium Falcon if you need a little bit more pressure in space, Admiral Akbar if you want more Restore and maybe a little bit of damage on board. So when you get to the point in the game where you play Home 1, you end up having a lot of options for it, which is really, really nice. So another one of those cards where like Home 1 and Akbar, I feel like work better in this deck than any deck I've ever seen in Star Wars. So yeah, the sideboard is, so now we would normally move on to the sideboard. But the sideboard is what I changed the most, going from version 1 to version 2. You can see in version number 1, I had the General Rikens. I never subbed them in. I had the Overwhelming Barrage, because at 7, yeah, you could play it early, but I just never really found a good opportunity for it. I think it was some fun spice, and it might still actually be good, but I'm taking it out for the moment. Another tech that's obviously in the main board now, like I talked about earlier. Another Spark of Rebellion. Bamboozle is a big card, and then Choose Sides. I ended up swapping back to Change of Heart because Choose Sides requires you to have a unit out to do the trade, and late game you just can't get a unit to stick. It was a fun idea because I wanted to see about permanently taking like an Avenger or something, but yeah, just the way the action order works, you're just never going to get it off. So let's take a look at some of the existing sideboard now, and let me swap to, this is the version that I'm bringing to a store showdown tomorrow as I record this. So a few little tweaks here. I went down to 2 spare the target. I felt like I didn't really need 3 in the deck. I was using it, but not a ton. up to 2 tech because, again, I'm kind of testing that out. Went up to 3 Spark of Rebellion in the main board because it's just such a useful card, and I feel confident in my ability to use it well enough. And then the sideboard is something I'm kind of testing out. We went from 2 home 1 to 1 home 1 in the main board. It was originally 1 back in the day. I added 2. I didn't end up playing it enough, so I went back to 1. But you do want 2 in there as an option for the longer matchups. But let's talk about some of the other sideboard cards that are in here now. Bamboozle is a great card. Obviously, you can still do the discard cunning thing to play it without paying a cost, which means that a lot of times you can surprise your opponent by having them think you're out of resources, you can't do anything, and then you can go in and remove an important upgrade. This is in there primarily to be subbed in for the Boba Fett matchup where you're worried about Boba Fett's armor, the Sabine matchup where you're worried about Darksaber, things like that. It's really nice to be able to deal with those in a way that your opponent doesn't really see coming. So I don't think you need 3 of them. The way you kind of think of it is a 2 of in a deck in Star Wars Unlimited is a card you can count on seeing once per game. 3 ofs, you're basically guaranteed to see at least, 2 in most games. 2 ofs you're guaranteed to see basically 1, and then 1 ofs you may not see every game, but it doesn't really matter as much. In this case, the Maul, because I can search it with U-Wing, and because I don't think it's the greatest 7-drop, and Home 1 because it's nice to have, but I don't end up using it every game. But so a 2 of Bamboozle, when you sub that in, I think is fine. Next card I included for the sideboard rather for the newest version that I'm going to try out tomorrow is Spark of Hope. Choose a unit in your discard pile. If it was defeated this phase, put it into play as a resource. One thing that I want more out of this deck is a way to consistently ramp so that on the 3rd turn of the game, I'm playing a 7-drop. You can get by just fine if you don't, but if you do have that ramp early on, this deck is like almost unstoppable, I'll say. So my question was, what can I do to make that happen more often? And the answer I came up with was Spark of Hope, because again, you're using your units early on primarily to trade, primarily to keep their board down, especially in a lot of aggro and mid-range tempo matchups. So Spark of Hope on the 2nd turn of the game, on the 3rd turn of the game potentially, seems like a good way to go, mostly 2nd turn of the game. And if you end up with it in your hand and you already have a resupply or something, you can always just, toss it near resources. So no big deal there. So a 2 of to throw in maybe in the aggro matchups where I'm going to be doing more trading early on. I'm not 100% on that, but it's something I want to try. And using those 2 slots in my sideboard, I don't think hurts me too much. All right. This is maybe a little bit of spicy tech, but I'm very confident in this card. Frozen in Carbonite. So the most difficult matchup for this deck is going to be blue, including control matchups. Primarily Kira. Kira Command is by far the hardest matchup that you can play in this deck. I have practiced against it a lot. I ended up hitting it in the finals of the store showdowns. I went 1-2, so things were close. But if it got to the late game, I just couldn't keep my big stuff alive, largely because of Avenger. Obviously, the single target removal is in there too, but Avenger is really the primary problem, where they get removal, but they also get a giant unit out there. My answer to that is I was thinking about, what am I going to do? I was thinking about Entrenched maybe, but then that still lets them attack if I play something in space, if I need to chip them down late game. So I'm like, I don't really want them to be able to attack with it. And I was like, all right, I've got plenty of resources. I don't mind paying 5 for this. I'm only paying the villainy tax. And it's just such a great card, right? Attached to a non-leader unit, attached unit can't ready. When played, exhaust the unit. So that just shuts down things like Avenger. And honestly, there's not a ton of upgrade removal in those control decks. Sometimes they'll run a Confiscate or 2, and maybe they can sideboard them in, but if you can surprise them with it once because you're sideboarding this in and they don't know they need it, then that might be the difference between a 1-2 loss and a 2-0 or a 2-1 win. So I'm going to try it. I'm pretty confident that it's going to be decent in the control matchup. The surprise factor is there, and I think it's just a good card. But we'll see. We'll see. I'll keep you posted, but I got high hopes for Frozen in Carbonite. It's also kind of a funny card to include in a hot list. Come on, let's be honest. Then we've got Change of Hearts. So originally this was 2 Change of Hearts in the list. Then it went to 2 Choose Sides. I didn't like Choose Sides, so now I'm back on 2 Change of Heart. For the reason being, they play Avenger or whatever, their huge unit late game. You take initiative, and then the first thing you do is grab their unit with Change of Heart for the turn. So what'll either happen is you'll either get to use that unit, do a ton of damage, make them defeat something, or you'll get them to use some of their removal on their own unit, which is also a win for you, right? Because it's like a 2-for-1 card-wise. They're losing their unit, and they're losing removal that they could be using on your stuff later on. So I think this card is just straight up better. I think it tests your ability to choose the initiative at the right time a little bit more, but if you can do that, I think you're going to get more out of it. After testing the two of them, I prefer Change of Heart, so I'm going to stick with that. And then finally, I was going to go to it, but you can see one, I'm circling with the mouse that you can't see, but one home, one in the sideboard as well. Like I said, I don't think I needed two in the main board anymore. And it's nice to just be able to sub an extra one in there, again, for those longer matchups, even sometimes for those like more mid-rangey matchups, you want one. So that's the list. Let's talk a little bit about how you play it. So generally the idea is and I'm going to go over a little bit what I already talked about, but we're going to summarize it here at this point. The general idea with this list is to try as hard as you can to play a 7-drop on the third turn of the game. Again, just to reiterate, the third turn of the game, ideally, we will have ramped once with resupply, and then you can use Han Solo leader ability, flip leader ability to go up to 7 resources, then play a U-Wing, Han Solo, a 97th Legion, whatever, right? That play in itself is very difficult for any deck out there to handle. Even decks with single target removal, because a lot of those decks, if they don't have a Fel the Dragon in their hand, they're not going to have enough resources for something like, usually Vanquish you don't even see very much anymore. Rivals Fall they can't pay for because they don't have 6 resources. A lot of times they don't even have 5. So, they'll be on 4 and you'll be on 5. So you can get at least a turn out of this stuff a lot of times, and that's usually enough to get you enough of a lead in the game to win it. So yeah, that's the primary goal, is to play a 7-drop on your third turn of the game. Now, how do we do that? The easiest way is to resupply on the first turn of the game and then just maintain. Just play some units. Don't really ramp with Han for the next couple turns, or for the next turn at least, and just try to establish a board with like an Ezra Bridger or a droid or an Echo-based defender or something like that, that just puts a road bump in their way, that maybe trades once, so that then on your third turn of the game, your 5 resource turn, you'll be getting a 4/6 leader and whatever big 7-drop you play. Or again, if you choose to go wide with U-Wing, you'll get whatever units you get out of that, right? 2 3-drops or 2 3-drops and a 1-drop, or a 4 and a 3, or what have you, right? That combination of things being out there, again, is just very hard to deal with. So you want to hard mulligan for resupply in this deck. I'll say that again. If you don't have resupply in your opening hand, put it back in your deck, shuffle, and draw another hand, and hope you have resupply. The games where you get resupply are very, very hard to lose. The games where you do not get resupply are still good games. You can still get out of it, but then it's going to require a little bit more finagling, a little bit more nuanced play, where you're going to have to be like, all right, how do I, again, throw enough roadblocks into my opponent's path to safely get to my turn where I can start playing my 7-drops? Because it's going to come one later, right? So those games, like, I'm not afraid of those games, but man, if you can get a resupply, it's so big. Like, you are so strong if you can do that. Again, that's why I'm hoping Spark of Hope kind of gets, lets me do is do that kind of thing more consistently. But yeah, mulligan for resupply. If you don't find a resupply, the other things you can choose to keep in an opening hand are R2-D2 and C3PO if you have both of them. And maybe if you're just feeling really not confident that you'll draw into anything, an Ezra Bridger, These are all things you can play on turn 1 because you'll have access to 3 resources. But I think R2-D2 and C3PO are, a large factor better than the Ezra, and then resupply is a large factor better than the droids too. So in terms of the turn 1 tier list, resupply, 2 droids, Ezra Bridger, right? And then everything else there is kind of meh, then it's kind of situational. So after turn 1, then the question is, do I need to play an Echo-based defender to block something? Do I need to play an Admiral Akbar to trade with something and then maybe start restoring and, taking off the damage that Sabine puts on me each turn, something like that? Do I need to establish presence in space with the Millennium Falcon? So then you get to your flip turn. again, you have a massive flip turn. You're going to get your 4/6 leader. You're going to get your 7 drop that you want, and you want to generally go for board control. This is not a deck that wants to be aggro most of the time. There are exceptions to that, but for the most part, you want to win by denying them having anything out and then just swinging in for like big damage a couple turns, right? Where it's like you've killed everything on the board. They play something that isn't super scary. So you're like, all right, I guess with my leader and my Han Solo unit, I can swing for 10 this turn. Then you become the beatdown. Then you become the player that they need to answer instead of you just trying to answer them, But the general principle is that you want to go for board trades before you go for base, unless you're really sure that they aren't going to go to base too. They're going to have to try to trade with you, I'd say Ewing reinforcement techs, you're going to want to look for the right 7-drop for the right occasion. Aside from that, you can do things like, the 2 droids and a Bright Hope. You can do something like the 2 droids and Akbar, That's another strong play because then you play the 2 droids first, you drop an Akbar, and then he's doing a minimum of 3 damage plus whatever else you had on the board, 4 if you've got the Han Solo leader out. So you could look for Echo Base Defender and Akbar. There's a lot of great combinations. You could go Sky and Air. You could go Millennium Falcon and then a 3 or 4 drop, or you could just go 2 in the air. You could go Bright Hope and Millennium Falcon, Gunship and Millennium Falcon. So Ewing feels very versatile. And again, knowing what to grab with Ewing reinforcements in the right situation is core to winning with this deck. If you make the wrong decision, and I will say this, I said this list was hard to play earlier, and this is one of the reasons why, is because you can very easily make the wrong decision with Ewing reinforcements, put yourself in a position where they clean it up easily, and then you're like, oh, now what, So knowing what to grab with Ewing at the right time against the right opponent in the right context is very, very important with this deck. And that comes from reps. You'll just get that from reps. Let's see. What are the general tips can I get? I would say a large part of your early game is making sure that the board is safe for your Han Solo flip. If you flip Han Solo and he just dies before he can attack, then you're probably going to lose. You're not going to be able to play a 7-drop. You're going to be stuck with not the greatest board. You might not be able to play anything at all because a lot of times you'll have had to tailor your hand in a way where you have 1 card remaining. And then, if that card can't be played, then you just have nothing, So make sure that things are safe for Han Solo to come out. Han Solo is your Taylor Swift and you are the security detail. You want to make sure that the stage is set and there's no danger present anywhere, that Han Swift is safe to go on stage and perform. You want to make sure that's the case here, right? If Han's not safe, then the deck just doesn't work. So you want to make sure you do that. Let's see. What other stuff is there with this deck? There's a lot of nuance to it. I should have wrote down a list, but I wanted to give you at least a kind of a basic idea. Playing against discards. So one of the things that I was kind of worried about coming into set 2 with this deck is the prevalence of discard in aggression. There are decks out there that do that. You see Pillage, you see something Authority. I forget what it is. It makes you discard 1. Force Throw, obviously. So there is discard, and that can be devastating for you. The best answer that I have for you playing into a deck that includes discard is to just, first of all, know your lists, know that it could be there, and then maybe you do just play a little bit slower. Maybe you do just take 1 more turn to get your 7-drops rolling rather than going super, super aggressive ramp to get there, right? Because again, if you have 1 card and they make you discard your Ewing or your Han Solo, then you're like, all right, well, now I can't do anything, So it's okay to play a little bit slower in those scenarios, because then when they do try to make you discard, you'll still have a couple of cards in hand and you can discard something and still be safe. I've been pillaged with this deck. I've had a bunch of discard thrown at me. And if I know it's coming, then I can tailor my hand in a way where I can afford to lose a card or 2 and then still keep going with the plan. Because if they're spending resources on making you discard, they're not spending resources on establishing the board. So that's kind of okay for us, because then when we get to play our 7-drops, they still won't have any more on the board than they would have otherwise, right? Because they paid for that pillage or something, So just knowing it's there and then slowing down your game plan a little bit to account for the possibility, I think is the best way to handle it. discard hasn't really been a problem for me with this list yet. Who knows? Maybe it's the players. Maybe it's that the list hasn't, been the scariest one. But I have had that stuff played against me. And again, as long as I know it's coming, I can play around it. It's not that bad. Not as bad as you would think it would be. Less bad than I thought it would be, honestly. But yeah, that's about it. I think if you go to the real late game with this deck, it's not exactly a place you want to be. You want to just keep gaining resources because you want a chance to, play a tech out to maybe get, one of your other 7 drops out later. Home 1 is obviously a great late game play. But yeah, the later the game goes, if it goes late, it's okay. If it goes really late, if the Avengers start coming out, again, playing against control that includes vigilance, the aspect, not necessarily the card, is the hardest thing this deck has to play against. So if you get to that point, you just kind of have to play it quietly for a couple turns, try to set up those combos where you get something out there that they can't handle, because you'll probably have them in a situation where you can attack once or twice and finish them off. Usually they'll have a good amount of damage on base by that point. So just trying to set up the win, I think, is the most important thing. Collecting a couple Millennium Falcons in your hand is a big deal. Or like having a Millennium Falcon in your resources, one in your hand, and tech. So you can tech out one of the Millennium Falcons, attack, then play the second Millennium Falcon from your hand, replace the first one, and then attack again. Getting that 6 damage sometimes can put you over the edge. So it's things like that. Finding the little combos that are going to help you kind of win the game. Maybe you U-wing into something where Fleet Lieutenant can buff something that's already on the board. Stuff like that. So that's what I love about this deck, is that the matchups all feel winnable. It's only really been Kira Command that's felt like the matchup where I just have a very low win percentage chance against. Everything else, all the aggro, all the tempo, even against Boba Fett, Sabine, I feel pretty good into, honestly, with this list. Take it out, take it for a spin, play it for some games, play it a couple store showdowns. I have no idea if it's going to be any good in set 3, but for now, for the remaining weeks of set 2, this is absolutely a very strong list to pilot right now in Star Wars Unlimited. I can't say enough good things about it. It's so much fun to play too. So get out there, give it a shot. If you have any other questions, join our Ice Cave Radio Discord, icecaveradio.com. There's a link to the Discord there. Join that. Ask us questions. We've got a channel for every single leader in the game to talk about deck tech. So feel free to at me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. And yeah, we've got a great community there too. Our Discord is awesome. Excuse me. So definitely join that. Until next time, I've got some other decks in mind that I want to build, but this is one I really wanted to get out, especially because I just did really well in that store showdown. Again, second place out of about a dozen people. So I think that's a legit result for a deck nobody's playing right now. Yeah. So wanted to tell you all about it. Hope you enjoyed. Get out there, play some games, have some fun. We'll see you next time.